Well, hello everyone, Texie88 here and welcome to another review. And now I bring you Highlander for the Sinclair ZX Spectrum, released by Ocean Software in 1986 and based on the film of the same name. Although, admittedly, it's more like it was based on a very small part of the film of the same name. Namely the sword battle and the fact that every time you defeat an opponent, you take on that person's and takes on the knowledge of the opponent once the victor has basically relieved them of their head. So, as you probably guessed, this is a sword slash 'em up. It can be done with one or two players. In two-player mode, player one only plays as MacLeod, whereas player two plays as one of the three other opponents that would otherwise be CPU controlled. But either way, the controls would be the same. So we'll stick with keyboard because that's what I'm using. Number of players 1. Press space to continue. And the first thing we notice is that although the backgrounds are quite nicely drawn, the sprites look like they were drawn at a smaller size, but magnified. So everything about them looks incredibly blocky, and it's although you can do parry attacks, it's hard to actually read the movements because everything's so blocky that the attacking maneuvers done by your opponents become indistinct, so you don't know how to actually what to actually do and when. And there's also this problem where you get knocked down, suddenly you end up sitting on your bum for goodness knows how long, and you can't do anything. The other problem is the controls are generally very poor and unresponsive. The controls are WADX for up, left, right and down respectively, with S being fire. I would have preferred it if it was QWASDZXC, a bit like Way of the Exploding Fist, so it wasn't seriously disadvantaged if you needed to do a diagonal manoeuvre. Oh, here we go, sitting on the floor again, which means you can't do anything until he decides to get up, which might not happen, as was the case there. This is absolutely appalling. Not to mention incredibly boring. I mean, this came out a year after Way of the Exploding Fist. That didn't even have swords in it. And the combat was way better than it is in this. There we go, sitting on the floor again. I mean, look at this. You're powerless to do anything. You could be hammering the buttons till you're blue in the face and nothing will happen. Ugh. Oh, God. It just looks like a jumbled mess of pixels when it comes to the actual swords connecting, so you can't actually tell what you're supposed to be doing in order to properly protect yourself. Not that you can properly protect yourself very well anyway, because the controls are so unresponsive and awkward. Oh, get up. I mean, you can kneel down like that. Oh, God. I don't think this is going to be a particularly long review. From what I can make out from my research about this game, it's literally just the same. If somehow you manage to beat Ramirez here, then you'll just be against two other opponents against two different backgrounds, but the core gameplay is exactly the same. Oh, God. I just can't get anything to work properly in this. Everything about it is horrible. Get up, you bellend. I mean, even for a game from 1986, this is embarrassing. And from Ocean as well. Now, Ocean have done some great, have published some great games for the 8-bit computers. Sadly, this is not one of their finest hours. Now, a few years ago, the YouTuber Larry Bundy Jr., aka Guru Larry, actually put up a video saying that this was actually deliberately made a really bad game because of a contractual agreement that if the games sold really well, Ocean would have had to have paid insane amounts of royalties to those who actually hold the rights to the Highlander film and franchise in general. And that would have reportedly bankrupted Ocean, which would have meant we wouldn't have had the likes of Chase HQ, for instance. And we all know what a masterpiece that was on the Spectrum, especially. The Amstrad version is pretty good as well, but it did have a very tight time limit, which wasn't particularly forgiving. Commodore 64, less said about that version, the better. But by and large, Ocean did some incredibly good ports and some incredibly good games in general. So the story, according to what Larry said, is that this game was made deliberately poor to ensure that it didn't do very well in the sales, and the gamble paid off and Ocean didn't go under. It's just a shame that anyone who did buy it will know, especially as it was £7.95, which would have been quite a lot of money for a child in 1986. They would have felt phenomenally robbed. Oh, God. This is going to be my last bout. Then I'll end the review, because this is literally all it is, and it's just horrid. The controls are just so unresponsive. It's just a case of press a direction, fire, and hope. Right, that'll do me. The Highlander game for the Spectrum is an absolute pile of crap, and it's really not recommended. The only thing I like about it is the background graphics and that display at the bottom. Everything else about it is poor. I mean, as you can see, it uses the Sinclair's character set for the text. The sound is exceptionally minimal, even for a 48K Spectrum. The sprites are blocky beyond belief, almost as if they were drawn at a smaller size and then magnified. Why didn't they just do them bigger to start with and make them less pixelated is anyone's guess. Given that Spectrum can handle some pretty large sprites with detail without massive amounts of slowdown, especially as there are only 2 sprites on the screen. I mean, Dark Scepter had massive sprites and had 2 sprites on the screen. It didn't go, and it didn't look like the jumbled mess that this does. And nor was it running at a piss poor frame rate. So I just don't understand why these couldn't have just been done properly and simply drawn at a decent at the actual size that you see them, rather than drawn at a small size and then magnified. The gameplay is what really lets it down, though. All of the controls are just so unresponsive, and that just makes the entire game completely unplayable. Even if you could somehow defeat the opponents, there's no variety apart from in the backgrounds and the actual combatant you're fighting against looking a bit different. Apart from that, it's essentially the same thing. The controls are just unresponsive, and because everything's magnified, it makes it simply too difficult to read the moves of your opponent, so you can parry effectively. But because the controls are so unresponsive, that it's being by the nearest fortune if you can actually do the defensive manoeuvre in time to block the incoming strike in question anyway. So if you're after a decent a decent film tie-in license, you definitely don't want to be looking at Highlander. It's really, really poor, and I don't recommend it. This version doesn't even have a musical rendition of Queen's A Kind of Magic like there is in other versions that I've seen other people play. So I'm going to give Highlander on the spectrum 2 out of 10. Nice background graphics and at the bottom, but those are the only two things I find even remotely commendable. Everything else about it is a non-starter. Hope you enjoyed that review. Catch you on another one soon. Texie88 out.